Hello, everyone, and welcome to Moment of Truth. My name is Emma Posey, the Coalition's Manager of American Moment.
And I'm Nick Solheim,
the COO of American Moment.
Absolutely.
Now, some of you might be wondering, how did Nick's hair get so good in just a week's time?
Because when you lose weight, you lose the devil inside of you, so your hair turns from red to brown, and you grow taller. It's great.
The most base take of 2022 will be that, in fact, demons are real.
Demons are real, and they live inside every redhead's heart, which is why I'm no longer a redhead.
And there you have it, folks.
Today on our channel, we have on two we met on Twitter, but they will have great conversation. They'll be drunk and belligerent, but no one will say the
And the best part is they're still more normal than the Democratic Party that is ruling in the White House just a few blocks away.
This week on what's our show called?
Moment of Truth.
Moment of Truth. Tune in every Monday.
6 a.m.
Ryan and Terry, welcome on the podcast.
Thanks
for having me.
So normally we'd start with who you are and how you got here, but unfortunately for our listeners, they've heard from both of you before. So we're going to cut right to the chase about why we're having you guys on. We want to talk about this 2021 election. There were a lot of mayoral races. There was a gubernatorial race in New Jersey that was a lot closer than we thought it was going to be. But the real surprise was a Republican win in Virginia. So we'd like to start with that. You're both leading PACs right now. And so why don't we start with Terry talking about what you guys are doing election-wise?
Well, what we're doing is we're building a pro-family political movement. It's not a crazy concept. It is something that every special interest group does to protect their interests, right? The NRA organizes gun owners to protect the Second Amendment. The AARP organizes seniors to protect Medicare and Social Security. And what APP is doing is we're organizing parents in politics to protect their families, protect their kids, and get public policy back to putting families at the heart of public policy. And this is a great time to be starting this movement and starting a special interest group for families, because the country is acknowledging that there has been whether or not it was accidental or purposeful, but there has actually been a war on families. And it's not just through values or morality or social issues. It's been an economic war. A mom and a dad both have to work today to make ends meet. That's not prosperity. And, if you were to listen to the establishment in both parties, you would think that America is just becoming more and more prosperous every day, but that's not true. So we're growing this movement. Right now, we've started off by opposing the easiest things to oppose, right? Like critical race theory, 1619, transgenderism in our kids' schools. It's obvious it is firing parents up across the country, and they're outraged, and we're tapping into that outrage and we're putting it to useful means. And what useful means is getting the bad guys unelected, collecting some scalps. We just put our first scalp on the wall. We have a big family wall of scalps. Terry McAuliffe's the first guy up there. I want that wall filled by next year. I don't think you have to unelect every bad guy. I think you just have to elect some key bad guys and then hold them up as an example to say, do you want this to happen to you? Because this is going to happen to you. And you'll clean up both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So that's essentially, from a big picture standpoint, that's what we're doing. I would differentiate us from other important organizations that are working on family issues in that we are primarily political. We are mostly focused on campaigns and elections. But the other thing that differentiates is that we're not trying to turn out the base. We're going after the people in the middle that are either leaning Democratic or undecided. And we're saying, hey, did you know that Democrats want to teach your kids that America's evil? Did you know that Democrats want to teach your kids that the color of their skin determines whether or not they're an oppressor or the oppressed? Did you know that they think that men can have babies and they're teaching your kids that right now in school? And surprisingly, it actually convinces a lot of people to vote Republican or at least not vote for Democrats. So that's our whole thing. We go after persuadable voters on the margins and use that to leverage it into campaign victories.
Yeah. That's awesome, and we've certainly enjoyed following your work over the last couple of years, and we're very glad, by the way, to have both of you on our board. I guess I didn't really think about that before they came on. Ryan, how about you? What are you working on?
So I have the 1776 Project PAC, which is the nation's first super PAC dedicated to school board elections. We did 58 elections this year. We won 41. One is still being decided, but hopefully 42. And hopefully we're focusing on doing a couple hundred next year. So, and when I say we, it's just me and my pack. So it's just me and me and my dog sitting there scheming about overthrowing school boards.
Very busy guy.
Yeah.
So to ask a very blunt question, what was this election really about? Ryan, we'll let you start.
I think that it was total. So I think that there's two things going on. I think it's a midterm coming up to midterm. So a lot of people feeling disenfranchised or disappointed with the incoming administration, which is what usually happens. Gas prices are higher, inflation's higher, yada, yada, yada. The Joe Biden wasn't what he, promised to be in their minds. And people they like a balance of power when one president is in office. Has happened basically every time for many, many decades. And I think that the problem with the parent stuff and the education thing is that a lot of, in 2020, because of COVID, which was unfortunate for many reasons, but the fortunate part of COVID was that parents for the first time got to see what their kids were actually learning, because they were learning inside their homes on Google Classroom or Zoom or whatever. And they were learning about in detail what their teachers were pushing. And George Floyd happened at the same exact time. So they understood racial issues in a very explicit way, and they were outraged from that. The race stuff and CRT happened before the masking in schools, happened before a lot of other stuff. It was CRT centered. And the response to children coming home to their parents and saying, or children telling their parents, I feel bad about the race I'm born in, I feel bad for being white, was school board members sitting there and saying, well, that's not happening. And it's just, you're mistaking it. CRT is not taught in schools, and I will walk over broken glass to protect it. It was a very insane dialect. If you told me we're not going to have dinosaurs sit in the classroom, I'm like, okay, cool. That's not a problem for me. It doesn't really matter. But they were sitting there and saying, it's not being taught, but I will do everything in my power to protect it. And so there was a conversation being had with parents sitting there and saying, well, they're telling me I'm an idiot for believing what my children are telling me. And at the same time, you have the George Floyd riots. You have the rise of Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi. You have the situations where kids on video are doing privilege walks, where fifth graders and fourth graders are being told to walk up front if they're white and their parents are married and all the rest of the stuff. You have examples in textbooks and in handouts. You have these huge payments to these anti-racist speakers. You have the 1619 Project. It was just a perfect storm. And the response by Democrats, in the case of Terry McAuliffe, was you have no right for your kids' education. And the other, in a lot of suburban areas where my school board played in, suburban areas that voted heavily for Joe Biden, was them saying, well, this is just not happening. You're completely mistaken. And everything, don't trust your lying eyes. Trust what I'm telling you. And then the Biden administration declaring that parents concerned with the kids' education are domestic terrorists was like the cherry on the cake. And I think that was just too much for them to handle. So I think both were happening. There's education aspect was a significant portion, plus not even for just parents, but for non-parents as well, like myself. And then the second thing was the natural political wins. But that's why what normally would be maybe an R+5 year, an R+6 year is now an R+12 year, an R+13 year, is that extra momentum from the racial aspect, the education aspect, and then just the denial by education people.
Boy, leave some answers for Terry, would you?
Sorry.
Well, no, I have something interesting.
He talks about the first question, so I had to get something in.
That's true. So it's really interesting. I know how these people think because I was obsessed with Bill Clinton and how terrible of a human being he was. So there's this, Bill Clinton actually started all this, the whole lie that critical race theory is not taught in elementary schools. It's a college level law school course.
Yeah.
They actually believe that. And it's technically true. Do you guys remember Bill Clinton was deposed and they asked him if he had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. And he said, I did not have sexual relations with her. And it was explained by his lawyers that in his mind, it was true because
Are you watching Impeachment too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So here's the thing.
Yeah, it was a really good episode.
He justified it by saying, well, I wasn't giving her sexual satisfaction. So I wasn't having sexual relations with her.
Because only he was satisfied.
She was having sexual relations with me.
Right.
And this is the typical Democrat lying that they're trying to pass.
That makes it even more disgusting.
So, but what
basically every married couple, only one is servicing the other, so that no one's having sexual relations.
I'm cringing thinking of my father-in-law listening to this next week.
So, but what I would say is, they're right. There is not a critical race theory in our kids' schools, like a class dedicated to that. But it's worse than that. It is in the DNA of every classroom.
Yeah,
what I always say is
everything.
critical race theory is not being taught, it's being practiced, which
Right.
is totally different, which is as important.
And it's worse though. I would rather have my kids learn about a stupid theory as like I don't care if my kids learn about evolutionary theory. I mean, I don't want my kids learning about critical race theory, but I'd rather them learn that than it just being embedded into the classroom.
Your kids are young. I mean, your kids don't have, young kids do not have the brain cognition. They believe so much what their parents and their elders tell them at this age. If you go to a public school that is financed by taxpayers, you should come out thinking your country is great. In college, fight all you want, but you're an adult by that point. You can sit there and decipher and make any decision you want. But the point of doing it for young children is to leave them at they're such an impressionable age that this is what they believe, like fervently.
Well, and part of that means too is that you're never actually clearly defining what critical race theory is, and so you're able to embed it in a whole lot of like tons of spheres
basically
from that,
critical.
right?
We say critical race theory, but it's basically critical theory. It's critical theory of many different forms. And we just
So Chris Rufo then says that critical race theory is anything we don't like. So how would you guys actually define critical race theory? What would you point to it?
So I would define it as this belief that there is an oppression hierarchy, and you are either part of the oppressor class or part of the oppressed class. And the more disadvantaged you are, the less white you are, the less heterosexual you are, the less normal gendered you are, the more on the oppressed scale you are. And society is always going to be divided in between the oppressed and the oppressors, and it's up to the oppressors to fix it and acknowledge their privilege. That's how I would explain it. It's basically transgenderism, all the LGBT stuff. Like, everyone's a victim except for the normal people. Those are the evil people.
I would make it simple in that critical race theory is the idea between power and race, and the structures of power and race, and how they meet to each other. A lot of what the early writings on critical race theory pointed to was saying, now it's been watered down to a million different things, but the earlier writings sat there and they had the opinion that all efforts of power are to protect whiteness, either in culturally or economic/politically, and any effort to create great equality was actually to preserve either political, economic, or cultural standings of white people. So one of the early writings, and I'm literally blanking on his name now that I have to sit there and say it, but An Introduction to Critical Race Theory by NYU Press. I don't remember the author's name, but I remember the publisher's name. The can you tell I'm a writer? The author sat there and pointed to the Brownback Board of Education. They felt that it was post-war blacks may rise up in anger. So that's actually why they sat there and ruled against segregation. It wasn't because segregation was wrong. It was because they were actually trying to protect the system that was, and they didn't want angry post-war blacks who had guns to sit there and rise against it. Now, none of that's actually true in any of the court documents. None of it's true in anything whatsoever. It's an idea, and every idea, like what Robin DiAngelo writes about, what Ibram Kendi writes about, what Tahaji Coates writes about, it's all on the idea that whites always have to play a double side. They have to both be understanding of non-white culture, but not actually integrate in it, because therefore they are being oppressed. and that logic of being neither, both but neither, it blends itself into every form of critical theory. And then when people talk about critical theory, you talk about critical gender theory, critical queer theory. There's a million of them, but critical race theory is the one that is being most ingratiated in all 50 states. Critical gender theory, critical queer theory is in certain localities in those states as well.
I read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and first of all, he's a terrible writer. He contradicts himself throughout the entire thing, and he white knights himself. It's really annoying. But I
was Robin Angel, her book.
Oh,
her book is borderline unreadable.
She's unbearable, so it makes sense.
These are double-digit IQ people.
Well, this is just an elite reference. No one actually reads the book. Or
no, they do.
They do.
People buy these books, which is insane.
I read it though, and I'm glad I did, because I understand their arguments now. Like Ibram X. Kendi basically says the reason America is systemically racist is because our legal system, all of our institutions, produce unequal outcomes for people of color. And that's why. He basically says that in order to fix all this, we have to have equal outcomes. So what that means is you have too many black people in prison, or there's a higher proportion of black people in prison. Well, you got to put more white people in prison. It's not getting more black people out of prison. It is, or actually in some ways it is, because they want to legalize drugs, they want to legalize prostitution, they want to legalize all this stuff that's been killing the black community. But why is it killing the black community? Because they've broken down the family. They come at this from, they're right. We do have problems with minorities in this country. They do go to jail at a higher rate. They do have higher drug use rates. They do have higher broken family rates. But it's because of the family. It's not because of our laws. Our laws are applied equally to everyone. And they would rather than do the hard work of fixing the family, which it will be hard, but really you just need to get people getting married and having kids and not bailing on them when they knock up their girlfriend. But if you fix the family, you'll fix all of this inequality.
I think the problem that they have is that they don't ever break it down to culture and class. Culture-wise, if you look at black immigrants versus black black Americans who were born in this country of slavery descent, blacks of slavery descent have huge fatherlessness, poverty, unemployment, drug use, prison imprisonment. Black immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa, total opposite. If you look at native whites of Kentucky, West Virginia, huge incarceration rates, fatherlessness, everything. Look at whites of Connecticut and Massachusetts, total opposite effect. And they refuse to look at class and culture as two combining factors. They see it as simply white and black. And that is idiotic.
So I want to bring this back to families, specifically in this election. You had a lot of families who live in suburban areas really, as you said, Ryan, really starting to realize what their kids were being taught because they were home with their kids all day and were looking over their shoulder at what's on Zoom. So these parents kind of started to challenge the ruling authority, started challenging the curriculum. I don't know if you guys are keeping up with this. The FBI has a terrorist watch list for parents who
speak out.
Yeah, who speak out.
Oppose the regime.
Yeah, can you guys speak to that a little bit and tell us why, the FBI is threatened by parents taking control of their children?
The NEA. Was it the NEA?
National Association of School Boards.
Sorry, National Association of School Boards. They sat there and said that there was threats in school board meetings, so therefore they should. I mean, these people are insane, and Joe Biden's administration, they fell for it. I'm genuinely afraid, though, that parents won't get as involved because they may be afraid of being on Joe Biden's enemies list.
No, that was the point.
At least Nixon had Jane Fonda on his enemies list. Now it's Joe Schmo at the teachers' conference.
So it was purposely designed to have a chilling effect. But as we saw in Virginia, it had the exact opposite effect. Parents were oh my gosh, we have to vote now. And it's obvious who the enemies are. The enemies are the Democrats and the progressives. And by the way, the enemies are actually within the Republican Party. The Republican Party that refuses to let us fight on these issues. I go back to...
Well, it's the Trump effect, because a lot of people were afraid to say openly, I'm voting for Trump. But because when you're behind the envelope, the curtain, whatever, you could do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing, is they're not going to, maybe people would not go up to a school board meeting like they used to, but they're behind the curtain, so they could do whatever the hell they want. No one's going to see them. It's still a secret ballot in this country for, right now.
But I don't see parents going away for one simple reason. Your kids are everything.
Yeah.
They're everything. The Tea Party was about money. Being really upset at the government, raising our taxes, making us buy healthcare, doing $1 billion. trillion-dollar bailouts for the biggest banks who are supposed to be the experts, right? I mean, we shouldn't have to bail out the experts. That was about money. And parents care a lot more about their kids than they do money. In fact, that's why both parents work nowadays. That's why they spend less time with their kids.
Also, in these hyper suburb wealthy districts, people move there for their schools. In many cases, in Long Island, for certainly, and outside outskirts of Philadelphia, they move to these suburbs specifically because the schools are good. So when all of a sudden you tell parents, people who voted for Joe Biden, they probably have a sign in their yard saying, "We believe in this household, that love is love." And you're telling them that no, this is actually really harmful for your kids. The town that you worked so hard to get to, so your kids have a good education. I think it has a mind-numbing effect, and all of a sudden, I think it's definitely a red-pilling moment for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So then one of the parts I think that we're seeing in Virginia that brought a lot of attention nationally were the two heinous crimes that were committed against the 15-year-old girls, respectively. And this brought up even more the topic of trans ideology and what was being taught in their curriculum regarding sex and sexuality. So can you two speak to the role of that? Because I know a lot of people would argue that that's where even like more heart of the issue is for parents, especially, is like not only are their children being taught CRT, but on top of that, the very dangerous ideologies, like we're seeing the like physical harm of that play itself out in our schools, and that being a very important rallying cry for parents in this conversation as well.
Just as someone that has kids who pulled my kids out of public school just last year, it's a dumpster fire. There's not just one reason why I pulled my kids out of public school. There's a lot of reasons. I was actually, like, I talked to my kids. I spend a lot of one-on-one time with each one of them. I help form them. I'm making them rebels. Like, they're going to be really good at arguing, really good at fighting. I want them to be pugnacious. So I wasn't really that worried about the transgender stuff, right? Like, I could easily make them laugh at their teacher if they told them that men can have babies. Like, be fine. My wife and I actually got upset and pissed. We found out they weren't learning anything else. Our kids are not proficient in reading. Our kids are not proficient in math. They're not proficient in science. They're not proficient in anything. So these schools are taking all of our money, wasting it to teach them critical race theory, transgenderism, like garbage. So it's a dumpster fire. And then when we go to the school board meetings to speak up against it, we get called domestic terrorists. Now, regarding the transgender thing, the thing that happened in Loudoun County should be studied. Like, people should be investigated for fraud. Like, people should go to jail over this, because what happened is actually much more nefarious than anyone realizes. So it's not in the school's interest to report these types of sexual assaults and rapes to the police, because then that's a story. This happened at your school. This is embarrassing. And now it's in the public record that your school had a rape, had a sexual assault. So what the schools did was they covered it up, and the school boards covered it up because of the situation. So if that was just a dude, a white guy, who wasn't in the girls' bathroom, who wasn't wearing a dress, they would have been making him the next Brett Kavanaugh. Oh, this is whiteness enshrined, and this is what white males do, is they rape little girls, and we need to put this kid in jail. But because he was wearing a dress, and because he was in the women's room, and because they were voting on a transgender bathroom policy, they covered it up. They covered up a policy. They covered up a crime so they could pass a policy that would lead to more crimes like that. That's what's really evil here. And then the kid goes to another school and sexually assaults another girl who's even younger this time. They're trying to mainstream pedophilia. You saw this with the transgender movement. So transgenderism used to be called gender identity disorder, but the LGBT movement came out and said that creates too much of a stigma among transgender people, and we really need to change the name. So they came up with transgender, and they came up with gender dysphoria. That's not a disorder. You're totally normal if you think you're a girl.
We promise.
But, isn't it gender dysphoria still?
It's gender dysphoria now, but that is not as harsh as disorder. Like, when you say something is a disorder, you're saying you're not normal.
What's a dysphoria and disorder?
A dysphoria is like when you're confused or you feel uncomfortable in your own body.
You're confused,
it's
but you're
slightly.
fine.
This is
Like getting
psychological.
hit on the head with like a mallet. Like
We are parsing
confused.
hairs. We're
What
trying to
happened?
understand the APA and these
Which
people.
changes every other week.
Right.
So it's not
Yeah.
a really good investment.
So like that though, they're now coming out. The sexual left is now coming out and saying the word pedophile carries too much of a stigma. And technically, there's nothing wrong with being attracted to minors. So we're coming up with a new term, minor attracted persons, MAPS, to decrease the stigma
That's
around
ruin
pedophilia.
Maps for everybody. Like,
Well, no, but think of this is
that
deliberate.
was a joke.
No, I know
Relax.
that. I know,
Okay.
but think about this. MAP is such a positive word. What does MAP do? It helps you find your way, find where you're going. What does an adult having sex with a minor do? They are they are changing how we're thinking about that. That's their goal here. Think about this. We've battled the schools about getting sex ed. Like, I'm not talking about reproduction out of schools. I'm talking like graphic, pornographic sex ed out of schools. And what they'll say is, well, we have to give kids condoms. We have to teach them about all this stuff so they do it safely. They're having sex anyway, so we should teach them how to do it
But
safely.
the thing is now Zoomers aren't having sex anymore. So like,
No, it's really sad.
they're not having sex. They're not doing drugs. They're losers. Like, I mean, they're not doing nothing anymore. So what doesn't matter. They shouldn't have.
Well,
it
they're not
anymore.
doing those things, and still STDs are on the rise. So we're really
They're
doing
not
something
really
wrong.
on the rise.
Still on the rise.
No, they're not. What's on the rise? No, they're not on the rise anymore. Zoomers aren't having sex. They're not banging. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, I understand. They're a culture who's on TikTok. The smartphone has ruined sex for everybody. So it's not as pertinent in that generation to begin with.
It's interesting. So, Terry, it sounds like you're saying that there is a progression, however you want to track it, from LG to transgenderism to MAPS.
Oh, here we go. You did this.
And it just seems like you set that up for us. And I'm wondering.
Okay, so here's how I understand it, right? The LGBT movement is just the sexual revolution professionalized and institutionalized, right? Like that's ultimately what they're doing with the LGBT movement is they are breaking down sexual mores and ethics to make it to where everything's acceptable. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Whatever whatever you want to say. Like, how does your gay marriage affect me? That is ultimately what it's about. It is a nightmare, but the whole LGBT movement is just a sexual revolution institutionalized. And so MAPS, pedophiles, is the final repression. It's the final barrier that Americans have not accepted yet. And to see the sexual left try to mainstream this is very concerning to me because, look, I still believe in the American people. I think they're very good. They are the only good thing left about this country is the American people. So what happens when our elites in the financial sector, in big tech, in government, in our legal system, in law enforcement, in all of that, in the mainstream media, what happens when they declare that anti-pedophile bigotry is no longer acceptable? What happens? I think a revolution happens, and we don't want a revolution. Politics is the avoidance of war. Politics is the avoidance of physical violence. And when you see these attacks on our political institutions, on our cultural institutions, that's ultimately where that would lead. So I'm really worried about, we've broken down every barrier. Our cultural elites will tell us that men can have
necrophilia is still not popular. So
necrophilia,
well, that
pedophilia.
and bestiality. But this is what's so concerning, right? So, like the metaverse.
banging a dead grandma still ain't popular.
Well, can I
but
just say
like-
one thing real quick?
Yes.
So here's why it's dangerous. And I know everyone, when I say this, that pedophilia is not out of the realm of possibility for being normalized or accepted in society or legalized even. I say that because we already accept in our country that children are having sex with each other, that minors are having sex, and we don't do anything about it. Fine. I'm not even saying that we should do something about it. But how far away, when you're saying that, well, kids are having sex anyway, how far away are you from saying, well, kids are having sex, and they're getting hurt, and there's really dangerous. Why not let an adult who's experienced show children the way? Why not let an adult guide them in their sexuality. What, isn't that safer? Don't you want someone experienced showing them the way? This is how sick these people are. And I might get canceled
I've
for
had
saying
sex
all
with
this.
a lot of adults, and most of them don't know the way. So I'm just telling you, like, I mean, it's a lot of lost causes out there.
No, but ultimately, I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I'm fine saying it because it's gonna happen eventually.
Yeah.
But it's not that far out. It's the same thing why we say, well, we're letting little kids have sex changes. We're letting them get top surgery when they're 15 years old. We're letting them get hormone injections. We're letting them block their puberty. So you're telling me you're okay with kids getting a sex change but not having sex?
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a very interesting thing to note too, is that people, like young people, are kind of being pushed into this, needing to mature quicker. Like people in schools are encouraging kids in high school to be sexually active at like 15.
Well, they're encouraging kids to be victims early on. So that's why, like, I think
that's a part of adulthood now, I guess.
I guess so, but like there's a study on like 29 or 30% of like young kids identify as LGBT, which is like absurd. Like that's not real, like, in the population whatsoever. And it's not because they actually are, but because you're a victim now. You're a protected class. It's reason why not a majority, but a large portion of young people who are white are saying they are Native American or Hispanic of some sort, even like they're Alec Baldwin's wife, even though they're not, because you're a protected class, and being a protected class is what you want to be, because then you're not as culpable as being just, straight or being white or whatever.
Yeah.
So bringing this back to, the election result from just a couple weeks ago, you were both very focused on
A little bit.
I don't know where the hell we're going at.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I have ADD, so that's what happens.
We'll be on
when
an
I'm
hour and a half now on the show. Go ahead.
So I think actually this was an important detour, though, just so people, who are working in Congress or who are working at think tanks understand how bad it really is. Because when I was seeing a lot of this on Twitter at first, maybe 2 years ago, my first thought is like, yeah, this is probably happening, but it's probably only happening in cities. So like if you get out of cities, you're fine. A couple months ago, I was back in Minnesota staying at a buddy's house, and there were some gals that I had gone to Christian University with, who are public school teachers and like upper middle class suburb in Minnesota, and they were telling us about how they are teaching like children's book versions of Ibram Kendi's stuff. Like they are manufacturing that stuff for kids in elementary school. They're teaching it to first graders. And so that was kind of a wake up call, for me being out here in the DC area, that I did not really understand that this is happening everywhere. So I think, everything that we just went through over the last, 20 minutes, it's an important detour so that people understand how bad it's really getting out there. So you've both focused a lot, in the last 6 months on actually changing this. I'm fighting back against this stuff, and I'm curious to dive into that and see really when talking with parents, when talking with people in communities, what's working and what's not on, this kind of messaging. How are you guys talking about these issues, to parents who may not be super politically engaged?
So CRT is not just a war when it comes to how history is taught. It's actually a fight over excellence and over meritocracy. In my hometown of New York City, Mayor de Blasio in his last few months announced he's getting rid of the Gifted and Talented program because too many Asians and whites excel in it. It's legitimately the reason.
They have the highest intact family rate, by the way.
Asians
and whites.
It's a war of meritocracy, and what is coming out of what is taught in history is leaking over into the hard sciences, into the hard math courses, and ultimately it's a dumbing down of education as a whole. And I think that I didn't take this in the 2021 elections. I will take it in the 2022 elections. Is speaking about excellence in education. Everyone wants their kids to do well. Most people want their kids to do well, and most people want opportunity for their children in whatever form it comes, depending on your economic background or whatever, what you expect of education. What CRT is the war on meritocracy. It's the war on building to the next level of your socioeconomic income and of your expectations of your livelihood and your children's livelihood. And I don't think that was focused enough this cycle because CO2 was such a hot issue. But I think that if it was applied correctly, it will be a hot enough issue in the 2022 cycle.
Terry?
No,
Does that make sense?
it makes sense.
Okay. As long as I don't sound insane, which I usually do. So
No, I like parents just want to feel like they matter, right? Like there was a really good focus group that CNN did. Oh, I know, but they did it with Democratic women who had voted for Joe Biden and Ralph Northam in the previous two elections, but had switched to Youngkin, and they asked them why, and it was a lot of different reasons, but ultimately where they all came down on was Youngkin listened to them. He made them feel like they mattered. He was telling them, I want you involved in your kids' education. Terry McAuliffe, I think what everyone's kind of internalized is that the Democratic Party over the last few decades has actually become the party of kicking parents out of their children's lives. It's just a reality. Like, you look at these Democratic school board members across the country, and if they're a Democrat, they're almost uniformly going to say something along the lines of, schools should be a safe place for children outside of their homes. That is implication and condemnation of parents being able to raise. Are there some bad homes where the children aren't treated well and are abused? Sure. But the vast majority of households are much safer than their children in schools. How many school shootings have there been versus how many in-home shootings from kids? Like, it's not even comparable. And in fact, like, if you actually want to like really get nasty with the Democrats, I just tell people now, well, I send my kids to a Catholic school because I don't want my kids to end up in a school shooting because they only happen at public schools. The public school system is broken. We have to fix it. And I think the Republican Party and the conservative movement have gone astray on the education issue by only focusing on school choice. We can't just demolish the public school system. It has to exist. It will always. The public school system isn't going anywhere. In fact, most voters oppose.
that's what I fight with Corey DeAngelis about. All the
Right.
time. Public schools always, majority of kids will always go to public school.
And they should. You should have a public education system. The reason that
The fight is over curriculum, and conservatives haven't touched it for 40 years.
my man, this is why we're friends. But
We're not
no,
friends.
no, we hate
I don't have
each
his
other.
cell phone number. I do have your cell phone
We
number.
were texting earlier. So I think this is an important. You're hitting on something really important, and I want to like delve a little deeper into it. I think similar to you know the healthcare thing, where you know Republicans' biggest campaign point for however many years was, oh, we just got to repeal it and then we'll figure it out.
Everyone
Then we'll
has
come
a
up with
health
plan.
savings account. We're set.
So in the same way, Republicans haven't come up with an actual like
Curriculum.
a curriculum or an attack on how we kind of take over public schools.
I did an interview with NPR today about this, and like what I think should happen, which will never happen because I'm saying it.
After everything you've said today, they still let you on NPR.
NPR and BBC last week. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
I
I
will
called
get
you right
canceled
after
for.
your-
Yeah, the BBC
Yeah.
interview did not go well. I don't know when it's airing, but it did not go well. But the NPR interview, they were like, "What's your ideal education?" I said, "Well, they should do 4 years of American and 4 years of global history. I don't think they should do 2 and 2 in high school. I just think that that's too short to get everything in, because I think what schools do, which it drives me crazy, is they try because so much of our history is Western oriented and Western viewed. They try to atone all the sins of human nature to Western people, to American and Europeans, even though slavery and things that are horrible that happen in our society happen in every society around the entire globe. It's something of human nature. Human nature from the beginning of time said, hey, I like to own that person. It's universal. But no,
All right, Ryan.
but the point is, what I was saying is that there are traits in human nature that happen in every civilization, whether or not they saw another civilization. We all sat there, for whatever reason, humans as a whole said, it would be cool to own somebody else. It happened across the entire globe in connected and interconnected civilizations.
Right.
that is a trait of human nature. It's not a trait of the white man. It's not a trait of America. It's not a trait of Europe. It's a trait of human nature. It's a sin of human nature. But for some reason, dumb conservatives and a lot of every liberal sat there and made it a white thing on black people when it is not. And I think that the incoherency and misunderstanding of history allows it to boil down to simple things like, those who are conquered and those who are oppressed, and those who are oppressees and those who are oppressors. And that's why I think the misconstrued parts of education do. I think education should be 4 years of global. You should learn a whole lot of things about different civilizations, and you should learn a lot of American history.
Globalist.
Yeah.
Well, there needs to be a distinction, I think, in that, because one of the things that we're seeing is like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, like what are the primary texts that we're studying? We're studying the great speeches of our presidents, of our founders, of like good Americans. Now, what are we studying? We're studying the works of Europeans, of philosophers across the world.
Or whatever.
Rousseau, right?
Or
We're reading so we're reading, right?
Yeah,
and we're not like raising patriots in excellence.
Yes, I think that all public people who go to public education should be like raised as patriots. I don't disagree with that. I just think that most of the sins of America could be applied to the global context, and I think they should learn a global history. I don't think they should learn just an American or European.
I just think you're using the wrong word and you're offending him. So can we use the proper nomenclature? World history? I mean,
what did I say? Global.
You say global. I mean, globalism. It just has a bad connotation, and you're offending my friend Nick.
Yeah. I'm very offended.
He couldn't get any more red, so I mean, how do I know he's offended? Oh, I'm just saying is that
I'm offended by the author of "They're Not Listening." How the elites created the nationalist populist revolution. Who is also a globalist.
I just think that
Wait, you're a globalist?
I just think that you should understand really global history and
I agree,
because if you don't, that's how they apply certain things to fixed populace, is when it is a human trait to sit there and say.
But that's what the standard used to be. The standard used to be you learned about Babylon, you learned about the ancient Greece, you learned about Rome, you learned about civilization. That's what
we should just make a school where they just do like math, like a men's school, math, science, and like the classics, and then like man boy love association. That's it.
But you're making a really good point about world history,
and like 5 female employees who have like very hot who have whips. Like that's about it.
Like for me,
I'm a disavow.
Look, I think America's done a lot of really bad things. The American people have done bad things. We made a lot of mistakes. We have our scars.
It's a big country. It's a lot of people.
Right. But when you put it into context of world history, all of the other civilizations that have like sacrificed human beings, like the Aztecs and the Mayans would sacrifice like hundreds of thousands of children a year. They would cut their hearts out. The priest at the top of the pyramid would eat them because they thought that your blood and your heart would like give them extra life. And then
we've come full circle back to cannibalism.
No,
I wanted to put it back in. You saw that?
Eating people is a big deal, but I just think
have you ever tried it? I heard you can't go back once you try.
I haven't tried a human flesh, but I'm
too
sure.
afraid.
Yeah,
I don't want to get a.
Now, I'm not going to tell a joke that I wanted to tell, but I'm going to pull that back. What I just think is that what is missing from education and from the overall conversation of Western civilization and Western people is the elongated story of our arch. Our like the arch of Western people is of greatness. And there takes a lot of steps and a lot of falls to get to that greatness. But we overarching more than any other people. I don't give a shit if I get canceled by whoever. The overarching movement of Western people is of greatness in how with the sciences we discovered, in the worlds we've conquered, in the civilizations we built. It is overarching a better world because of Western people. And that is what is missing from quality education, to sit there and say, yes, there are mistakes made. Yes, there have been really crappy people who've been in charge of different things, and people have been mistreated along the way. However, the world today is better because of the Western civilization, the people that came out of it. And that is what's missing.
So I want to ask a follow-up question on that. How do we actually do that? I mean, how are conservatives currently missing the forest for the tree?
So it's not just school choice. You have to take over your school systems. And that's where Ryan's doing like infinitely important work, is you're taking back the public education system. Here's the thing. These school, Fairfax County, Virginia, $3 billion a year that they spend on the public education system. 180,000 students, $17,000 per pupil per year.
Oh my gosh.
My kids should know Greek, They should know Latin. They don't even know math.
They should know everything.
They
about
don't
the
even know
Byzantine
English. For crying out loud, right? They should know everything about the Byzantine. But we have to take it back. There's too much money at stake. And by the way, the teachers unions take those tax dollars that are primarily going to those teachers' salaries. They take a big portion of that, give it to their PACs, and then run campaign ads and elections to get more of their people elected. They turned the school board on its head. The school boards were designed.
Well, that's the great irony is that this whole last year, all I've heard from my critics were like, "You want to politicize school boards?" I'm like,
yes.
No, the teachers union did that way long before I got involved.
What's wrong with politicizing things though?
But but the point is, it's already politicized. Don't blame me. I'm just joining the game that's already existing.
And you're the only person on the right that is.
I'm the only person on the right in many of these areas who have, and I get a wall thrown on me for doing it.
I think where conservatives go wrong though is we have all internalized something that is very false. It's a half-truth, which is that politics is downstream of culture. Politics is culture. And it's the only part of our culture where the everyday man has an actual say. Try and take over academia. Try and take over the mainstream media. We have like a lot of news networks now to compete with the others, but they're not doing as well. Like, you can't try to take over Hollywood. It will take you decades to take that over. But you know what? We can take back Congress next year. We don't have decades to wait. We have to take back politics. We have to take back the reins of government. We have to take back the purse, the money that's going everywhere, and we have to reform it. And the beautiful thing about Ryan, and why he's going to
there are a lot of beautiful things.
No, you're right. Look at that hair. Look at that. What
Look
do you
at
call
the hair.
Is it a waft? Is that what you call it?
A waft.
What style is it though?
It's just I woke up like this. I literally did wake up like
bouffant.
this.
Is it a bouffant?
I literally pushed my hands through my hair. And
No,
I
but it says hair. Okay, fine. He doesn't want to.
I have nothing to say. I literally woke up and I felt like this. I said, "We're good." And then
All
I
right,
walked
Ryan,
out.
we're gonna circle back to that.
Yeah, we're gonna circle back.
But we have to start understanding that politics, in a lot of ways, can drive the culture. When you change the law, you change society. The law is a teacher, and our founders understood that very well. And look at big tech right now. These big tech corporations, which like Google's worth $2 trillion, Microsoft's worth $2 trillion, Facebook's worth $2 trillion, like all these $2 trillion companies.
Hopefully Tesla, my stocks will be worth $2 trillion.
My man, do you have a Tesla?
I have a Tesla stock.
You need to get a Tesla.
I don't give a about that. I just want my stocks to go up.
You have to own the things you invest in.
Listen, all I know is I put money in Express. Everyone told me it was going to hit, and it didn't. So I need Tesla to make up for it.
So okay, I want to ask this follow-up question though, because you were talking
Investing
about
through Twitter is not the game plan. I'm just telling everybody right now.
Oh no, those
don't
accounts
do
are
that.
not good.
Yeah, I don't.
They're wrong.
I learned. So
you were talking about Republicans having the potential to take back Congress in 2022. That's something that a lot of people are talking about. I think one of the bigger concerns that a lot of people on the right have is what for? Like, why? Because a lot of the leaders that are currently in Congress on the right are kind of seen as weak on a lot of these issues. Again, two different guys, two different word choices. But
look at Trump, right?
I have no boss.
I love Trump. I'm his biggest fan. First 2
Did you
years.
vote for him in the primaries in 2016?
I
did not.
I was not. No, I was not. I was very skeptical because he had pictures with the Clintons. He was saying crazy.
I'm asking who'd you vote for?
I voted for Ted Cruz.
Okay, just questioning.
Not a Jeb fan, that's for sure. But what I will say is, look at what Trump and the Republicans did with their first 2 years in office. We have the Senate. We have the House. We have the presidency. We passed permanent corporate tax cuts for companies that hate us, and we gave the American people temporary tax relief. A family has less tax relief than what we gave corporate America. Why does AT&T, why does Google, these companies don't even identify as American anymore? Twitter's not an American company. Apple's not an American company. You look at their box, it says it says designed in Palo Alto, California. They aren't an American company. Yet we give them all of these loopholes. We give them all of these advantages and these privileges. They don't even identify as Americans. Yet our Republican Party and our president prioritize these globalist corporations over the American people. Why? Is it politically popular to give Google more money? Is it politically popular to give Verizon a bigger tax break? Mitt Romney lost the 2012 election because he said that job creators and entrepreneurs and big business should get more money and more tax breaks than the everyday people. It's a losing policy in politics. And not only that, does it lose you elections, it hurts your country. And so I'm with most people.
Terry's right.
I think the problem with America is the American people can't trust either major political party. They can't trust the Democratic Party to be honest with them and actually tell them the truth about their agenda and what they're trying to do, or even to trust them to do the right thing. It's an evil party. But they can't trust the Republican Party to effectively oppose the evil party.
Yeah, so
I think Americans trust Democrats more on issues and Republicans more on culture. I think that's the problem.
You mean on economics?
I think they trust
Democrats more on economics
and Republicans more on culture.
What if, hold on, I just came with an idea. What if we started embracing more populist economics, right? Like, this is crazy. I know it's crazy. What if we gave like families more economic incentives and lightened their economic burdens and made it easier to have a family and like, pay for bills, pay for education, all that, instead of giving corporate America all of our tax breaks?
Kevin Brady would drop dead immediately.
I know.
It's
but
terrible.
let's go propose it to him, and then maybe
I know.
So here's what I'm curious about, because you're getting to the core of my point is, like, why should any normal American bother voting for conservatives?
It's our only option, right? Like, go start a new party. See how that will work out for you. Democrats will get super majorities.
Andrew Yang 2024 is all I'm saying.
Stop. Are you kidding?
I'm
kidding.
Of course I'm kidding.
You're kidding.
I'm kidding.
Okay.
The Forward
We're friends
Party. Yes, I think so. I still have your number. Unless you change it before this.
I'm about to change it. I'm about to change it right now.
No, there is. What other option is there? There is no prairie populists. There's a whole interesting idea I've actually had coming here about Democrats who were when they got elected to office, were more in line with their states, like Tim Ryan, who was very pro-gun when he got elected to Congress back in like 25 years ago. And they move with their party more than move with their state.
I don't think that's right. I don't think he was elected 25 years ago.
What is it, 20 years ago? He got elected
Tim Ryan?
Yeah, in the 90s.
Isn't Tim Ryan isn't he like 45?
No, he's in his 60s almost.
Really?
Yeah, I know he's old.
That's crazy.
Why would you second guess?
Why
I don't.
Okay,
sometimes.
all right.
No, he's been in office for at least at least a decade plus, whatever it was. He was very pro-gun, and
I just thought he was a skeezy-looking white guy.
A skeezy? Wow.
Yeah, no, I mean there are many skeezy
How old do you
looking
think
white
Terry
guys.
is?
Look at Albania.
Stop.
I'm not gonna guess.
Stop. I'm
Anyway,
35.
I mean, you look like
35
you're my age, so
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
I don't think you'll look his age, but the whole thing is that there was a lot of Democrats who were very in line with their party when they were elected. Senator Casey from Pennsylvania.
Sherry Bustos.
Yes, Sherry Bustos. There were Democrats who were very in line with their states and their localities who moved with their party but didn't move with their state because their state moved the other way. And I think that I don't know what the point with this conversation was,
what were we
but the
talking about?
beginning was
I was asking why should people bother
because
voting
there is
for-
no option with Democrats anymore because they choose to move with their party unless you're Tulsi Gabbard, who is our queen. But unless it's Tulsi Gabbard, everyone else moved with their party rather than their state.
Well, not everyone, though, right? You have the man in Florida whose name is escaping me who just jumped from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party.
That was Texas.
That was Texas.
Yes.
Texas, Florida, they're all great.
He was-
Rob
and
was
he's-
telling us.
Yeah.
and he's-
The point being, though, if he's
7
switching
feet
parties,
wide by 7 feet tall.
if we're seeing Democrats switch parties to the Republican Party, saying that like their party no longer aligns with their values, their family's values, and the values of the districts that they're representing, is there a chance that we're going to see more of that? IFS just had a study where people who are rich, people who are religious, or people who are Republican are the most likely to have kids and to get married, and people who vote Republican are most likely to be married. Like, there's just a lot of like
Yeah, but that's a
trends.
culture.
Realignment. The answer to your question is there's a realignment happening in this country, and Democrats did the dumbest thing ever. they gave the Republican Party the working class. Like, think about how dumb that is. Like, working class voters now have nothing in common with the Democratic Party. They own them.
Democrats are fighting for the wino clock demographic.
We can win them back. We can win them back just by saying Democrats are the real transphobes. Democrats are the real like those are the easiest voters to win back, and that's where Democrats really screwed up.
Yeah, that's the real galaxy brain take, is that like Dems are the real racists is actually like a good campaign slogan, because like most normie voters would believe in it. I think what you're saying though, especially bringing up Charles Murray's book, is interesting, because something else he talked about in his book was that a lot of these people they're basically like campaigning and voting against like what they're actually doing. So they're practicing like family-oriented social conservatism within their own home, right?
Right.
They're not getting divorced. They're making a lot of money.
Right.
They live in a nice neighborhood, but they're like wanting other people to not do the same.
The areas that are majority white that vote for Democrats live much closer to the 1950s than the areas that vote Republican who vote Republican. There's a huge difference, and those who have the money to sit there and live like 1950s still choose to live like 1950s.
Yes. All right. So then there's like three ways that you can look at this. You have like the Democrats, who claim to be the party of the parents, like, after the election, when they realized that maybe that would be a better like voting like line for them, when in reality it's just like the party of like, let the government be your parent. And then you have...
We can't smoke in here?
Absolutely not. And
Jared will kill you.
I have to pee so badly, so go ahead, keep going.
And then you have like old school Republicans, right, who were like, we're all about parents' rights. And you can see it on a lot of older Republican organizations. But in reality, I think that just kind of breaks down to, I don't know, parents should take their kids and run, more or less. And then you have like the party of the parents of this like new conservative realignment that we're talking about. How would you differentiate this current one from like the past Republican, we care about parents' rights groups?
Most of the early parent education things was very religious oriented. It involved prayer in school and creationism. So when I started my school board PAC, I literally looked into evolution of school board campaigns on the right. And after the 1980s, really the evangelicals packed up and left. They were done because the courts ruled against them. So rather than even engaging in this subject matter, they just stopped altogether. They were very successful in their campaigns to get school board members who were care about school choice and school prayer and creationism in schools. And once they lost in the courts, they just gave it up altogether. I mean, this is true. They just did. 1980s.
Yeah, I know. I think it was much more religious in nature, and now it's more
civic.
Yeah. I also think that it's more real, right? Like, they're teaching your kids that America's evil. They weren't doing that in the 90s.
And your parents are evil too.
Yeah, no, it's not just that. It's they're teaching your kids that you're evil, that you're the enemy, that you're not trustworthy, that they're the ones.
It's like when you say, I'm not equating public schools to a cult, but it's like
I am.
Okay. When you see people in cult-like behavior, you see them losing them day by day by day by day, and they moving away. When kids are spent for 10 hours a day in a public school environment where they're being told you're evil, you lose them day by day by day. I know a lot of conservative parents who are they're devastated with their children being like libtards, and that's just.
Can you say the word tards?
100% think that that's an okay term. The point is that when you see people, when you're losing them constantly day by day, I think that parents feel the need to be more engaged, is because they don't want to lose their kids.
So then what would a positive vision for Republican agenda for education be? Because basically the best we have is Ronald Reagan being like, abolish the Board of Education.
Well, no,
I totally reject that. I think we should have the Board of Education.
I agree with that, and I actually think you need the Department of Education. It just should be used for the right purposes.
Right. Exactly.
So then
we have to engage
people
in
who are
politics.
afraid of power say the Department.
Okay, I just want to make something very clear. Democrats get elected, install new idiotic institutions that are anti-American and Marxist. Republicans then get elected as a direct response to go and repeal that. Their taken over and have internalized libertarianism. We can't use government. We can't use government to even repeal or repudiate the government overreach that the Democrats did. So we just have to move on. It'll kill our reelection chances. So then they lose because the American people are like, oh, well, screw you. You didn't do anything. You didn't do what we elected you to do.
Right.
Screw you. We're going to go for the Democrats now.
So then in this wild scenario where people are actually comfortable using the power that the people gave them when they were elected to office, then what should they actually be doing in office?
People should be doing primarily, and especially with school board education, because that's what I focus on mostly right now, is sitting there and creating an agenda where both parents are where teachers are accountable, parents have a say in it, students have a say in it, and create one that rewards meritocracy, rewards good grades, rewards children who work hard, expands opportunity for children who may not have the material needs necessary to, do it on their own parents' income if they're low income, for example, and also sits there and expands education opportunity. Children should have more well-rounded education. I fully believe in that. All those things should be happening, and the money is there. It's just misapplied. So much money in education goes to administrators, goes to dumb programs. If that was reapplied into expanding children's education, I think that people will be much more happy with it. It doesn't take a lot to make the American citizen happy. It takes competent people who are responsive to their local government, and that is what I think is most important in local education.
I agree with everything Ryan just said. However, I think that strategically, we need to take back the House and the Senate and halt the Democrats' agenda. This stimulus bill that they just passed is not good.
Infrastructure.
I know they call it an infrastructure bill. It's not an infrastructure bill.
Gender is infrastructure.
Yeah, right. Everything's infrastructure. Stop their agenda, but it needs to be focused on the presidential race. So stop their agenda in 22. And then once we get the presidency back, I think the first thing that the new Secretary of Education needs to do, and the new president needs to do, is an executive order that requires every public school system that receives funding from the Department of Education to undergo a full forensic audit of their finances. You get them busy. First of all, there's so much money that these schools spend
And waste.
And where the hell is it going? They will flip out. They will freak out because they've been giving it to their friends and allies. They've been wasting it. They've been fraudulently spending it. There are billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that are spent through the Department of Education in public schools that is fraudulently spent. Get them busy with that. And then Ryan's group gets a bunch of school boards taken over. And then we can start changing the social stuff. While these schools are focused on the forensic audit and freaking out about going to jail for defrauding the taxpayers, we can then change the culture. It has to be a two-for thing. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on and
You're
covering
giving us
all
the
this
hook.
stuff with
Thank
us.
you, yeah.
We went too long.
I
It was like a 3 hour.
So bad right now.
I gotta have
Okay.
a smoke.
Piss my pants
We
at
can't
this
smoke in
point.
here.
No,
I
you
I
don't
have
do
nicotine gum waiting for me, and I gotta go to the bathroom.
Okay,
so
all
badly.
right. So before we break for you for the bathroom and for you for a smoke break, where can people find you and what you're up to?
1776 Project PAC, PACPAC.com.
Terry?
SaveTheFamily.app. Join. It's a big family. I want you part of it.
I got
I
my
want you
card
to
in the
find
mail the other day.
Did you?
I carry it in my wallet now.
What number are you?
666.
You don't have to reveal that information. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming
Thank
on,
you.
and
My
we'll
man.
see you around.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was a great episode of Moment of Truth today. Nick, what did you think?
I think that Ryan kid had a lot of good things to say. I think he was very smart, intelligent. Probably the best and smartest kid we've ever had, actually, on the show. Terry guy, he was fine. Passed, normal, whatever. But the Ryan kid, excellent. best we've ever heard so far on this program.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry has it going for him. He has like 5 kids, so we have to give him props for that. He's really standing up for the Republican Party and the future of our republic. So one of the things that we want to remind you guys is to check out Am Canon. Jake, our creative officer, works very hard to put the most up-to-date pieces on it, including this guy Ryan's book, They're Not Listening. You can read the review of it online and even order it from one of our local bookstores.
Absolutely a must. Holidays are coming up. You want to give your mom something nice, get her this book. It's great.
Yeah, it's even written at the level of a second grader, so even your children can enjoy this book.
You don't need no grammar, English, basic understanding of anything, and this book has worked for you.
It's a good one. And then on top of that, in case you didn't hear enough from Terry and Ryan today, you can apply for our fellowship coming summer 2022. So if you go online to American Moment interest form under fellowships, go ahead, fill it out, and get on the list to apply when our summer fellowship for 2022 becomes available. And you will have the opportunity not only to intern in a pristine office or organization in DC, but also learn from brilliant political leaders like Terry and Ryan.
Absolutely. Even though Ryan was not invited to speak last year, which he's getting over it, and he's fine with it, and he's dealing with that loss and that hurt, but he's okay now at this point. But other people who are just as acceptable, probably not, but decently on the same level as him, will be talking to you if you apply. So that's great.
Humility is our highest virtue. So rate and review the podcast and find it on all the places that you like to listen. And folks, we'll see you next week.
Moment of Truth is an American Moment Studios production filmed at the Conservative Partnership Center. Our podcast is produced and edited by Jake Mercier and Jared Cummings. Our intro music is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all platforms, and you can go to AmericanMoment.org to learn more.